All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited about this segment with special guest Ankita Deshpande from Alexion, AstraZeneca's rare disease business unit, to discuss her approach to innovating in the pharmaceutical industry and the open innovation approach that she takes. Alexion is on a mission to transform the lives of people living with rare diseases and devastating conditions through the development and delivery of innovative medicines, as well as through supportive technologies and healthcare services. So welcome, Ankita. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you. Before we get started, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about Alexion and what fires you up about being part of the team?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and happy holidays to all of the listeners. Although I guess when this airs, it might be post holidays. So I hope everyone had a really fun holiday season. Alexion has been a really special place for everyone who's worked there, as well as the patients we serve. It's one of the first companies that really dedicated its mission to serving the rare disease community. And that spirit of helping people who might not have other options or who need to have their voices or appreciate having their voices elevated because they feel alone with their condition has been something that really drives all of us at Alexion every day. What's really great about the culture we've developed is we have really close connections to the individuals who may potentially benefit from the medicines that we create. People, families whose lives have been affected by these rare diseases, individuals who have grown up with rare diseases, and we've been able to see their progression through life from being babies to being toddlers to now being really active young adults. It's really heartwarming to see how their lives have been impacted.
Wow, that's really incredible. So what kind of diseases do you typically see in your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, these conditions often are genetic in nature and sometimes hereditary. So such that, you know, um, babies are born with the condition and you often see really devastating manifestations. But many of these conditions also have kind of slower progressing onset. So you'll have some individuals with the disease might present as infants, and some may not present with serious deficits until adulthood. But I
Right.
think one thread that really weaves together the diseases that we treat and the diseases we work on is people suffer and suffer a lot.
Mm,
Whether that's from pain, fatigue, muscular weakness, or the uncertainty of not knowing when you might have another attack, or the uncertainty of not knowing when your disease may progress, or
right.
that you might pass it on to your children. And all of that combined, I think, makes these diseases really impactful to the lives of the people that live with them.
That's got to be such rewarding work. Um, how long have you been with the team, and how long has the team been in place? Because you mentioned, you've been able to watch some of these patients grow up. So it's been around for a little while.
Yeah, I should know this. I think we just had our 30th anniversary actually, so
Okay.
I definitely should know this. Yeah, Alexion's been around for 30 years.
Amazing.
And I've been at the company for 5, so
Okay.
not that long relative to the company's
Yeah.
existence.
But I'm sure you've heard all the fantastic stories of people who have been there longer than you. And yeah.
Amazing stories, and we still see some of the same patients coming in year after year to tell their story and visit us, and so it is very we do have that really close connection, not just to the community but also to our history.
Right. So does that mean you guys operate like at a hospital? Or are you like
Mm-mm.
right there? No, but patients still
No,
come in to
so
see you.
yeah, we host patients often. They, for those individuals who enjoy sharing their stories,
Mhm.
are welcome to come and visit, and we host them and they can share their stories. We have a few that we have materials that we've
Mhm.
created on that we can share publicly as well. By no means is it every single patient, right? Many people, just like you would, everybody else, there's a dichotomy. I think some like to tell their story and like to share
Right.
it with others, and many others are very private.
Yeah, of course. I feel like it would probably get a little hectic and busy at the office if everyone was coming in to share their stories. That's
Exactly.
fantastic. So, your team, it sounds very interesting, the work you're up to. Maybe you could give us a little bit more information or insight into, what exactly your team does and how you kind of approach the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really interesting and really special about Alexion is when we've sort of had a number of lives, as many small companies have, right? You kind of pivot and transform, and leadership teams change, and I think the culture and the organization really changes with it. So when I started in 2018, we also had a relatively new leadership team that had started just a few months before. And I think one of the hallmarks of that leadership team was a real emphasis on culture and on employee engagement, and really making people feel like they were connected to the organization. And we're valued, right? We're really valued contributors. And so as part of that, they created this really neat organizational structure called human experience. And human experience was a function that included traditional HR, but also our talent development and talent management and talent acquisition groups, also our IT or technology experience groups, as well as our employee experience team that was really focused on making sort of the workplace a really great workplace. And then our patient experience team. So the folks that were really engaged with our patients, really trying to get, connecting with patient advocacy groups, really trying to get insights on patient journey, and really supporting our patients and their needs. And then there was one last component, which was sort of our capability development, which was areas that the organization felt as every employee really needed to build in order for us to be a world-class organization. And innovation was one of those capabilities that the executive team prioritized. So within this human experience function, there was an innovation vertical. And myself and another one of my colleagues, Doug Stover, we were really tasked with building out this capability in the entire organization.
Wow.
And when Doug started, actually, he went on a listening tour and kind of sort of said, well, what are some of the challenges that people face? And we really heard two things. One, despite the fact there's a ton of emphasis on innovation from like the leadership level, and there were a lot of people, within the ranks that really wanted to do innovative things, there just wasn't the time and space and sort of incentives and structure that was created for innovation. But there were lots of ideation sessions, right? And so people kind of equated innovation to ideation, but there was no follow through. And the fact that there was no follow through was creating challenges with people not feeling empowered or excited to participate in these ideation sessions, because it was like, so we come up with cool ideas and then what?
Yeah.
So the first product that our team came up with we called it an Accelerator. It was basically to take these ideas, right, and actually put teams together from across the organization in an agile fashion, and give them the structure, a little bit of a budget, time and coaching to see if they couldn't create something, right? Generate some evidence, whether their idea was a good one or a bad one, or at least enough to warrant potential further investment in the future, right? Or to make that case. And so that accelerator has now been running for a couple of years. And we actually just had our pitch December 15th, and it was really cool to see. I'm hoping to do a LinkedIn post about it. And if I do a LinkedIn post, I can send it to you. So maybe you can link it into the show notes.
Yeah, 100%.
And the other cool thing is now our team has expanded. So now we're not only focused on just sort of the innovation capability, but we're also focused on kind of like bringing in kind of other outside of the evolution of healthcare outside of pharmaceuticals, like digital health, for example, or healthcare experience, and bringing those principles, technologies, and approaches into the organization as well. So my new team is called Digital Health and Experience Innovation. The Accelerator is still part of it, but we've got a lot more going on, which is really exciting.
That is really exciting. It's so interesting. I've talked to so many, innovation leaders, professionals through my podcast, and it always seems to come back to some struggles within culture within the organization, and really kind of getting everyone on board to start moving that needle, because there is nothing more discouraging than having some great ideas or something that you think, really can have some good momentum, but then it just falls flat because for whatever reason it may be. So I just want to take a step back quickly, just for some of our listeners, because I know AstraZeneca is probably a very well-known name these days, and like maybe a few of the names like Alexion and your team name specifically might not be as well known. So maybe if you could just take a quick minute and just explain the relationship between them, just so everyone kind of knows the background and kind of how you work.
Yeah, absolutely. So AstraZeneca is one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies. Yes, they've definitely made headlines lately for the amazing contributions they've made to COVID vaccination and treatment globally.
Yes.
This is actually, it's interesting. It's the first time I've ever like worked at a company who has name recognition globally. Like I was in France and I would say I work for AstraZeneca. They're like, oh, the vaccine company. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is pretty cool. Um, and so in 2021, AstraZeneca acquired Alexion. So
Okay.
we were a freestanding independent company. Now we are a independent business unit within AstraZeneca. So we still kind of operate in the same way, like really high touch, with our patient populations, high touch with our physicians, like really making sure that we're connected to the community. But we are part of this bigger AstraZeneca umbrella organization, which is
Hmm.
pretty cool because it gives us
Yeah.
access to so many new resources. And it's a 90,000 person organization. So
Yeah.
pretty much overnight, all of our professional networks just like grew 90,000 people. It was kind of wild.
Yeah, that would be crazy. It's yeah, massive company and incredible contributions over the past few years. So it is like I feel like a lot of people they get their medication or whatever it may be, and they don't really understand like know the names of where that's coming from or the big pharma behind it. But now, like you said, you have such global recognition. It's got to be very interesting to be a part of that team.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it's interesting you bring that up, right? Like most people probably don't even know like the brand name of their medication or the name of their medication, let alone like who makes it. And
Yeah.
then to go even one level deeper and really get to know the humans who work at that
Mm.
company, right? Who are so dedicated to their jobs day in and day out every day to bring these medicines to people who need them. We often talk about the fact that like, pharmaceutical companies, they don't have the best reputation. Like I think we can call a spade a spade. And it's it can be really disheartening when you're one of those people who's so dedicated. And we've had folks who show up on Christmas Day because there was a science experiment that had to be done that particular day, and there you go.
Wow.
And so it's there are real people who are so committed to the healthcare of the world that are working
Mhm.
at these companies, and their dedication and their passion is really what fuels all of the innovations that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, I really happy to hear you say that because I have a few friends that work in pharmaceuticals and they've always said the same thing. And I totally agree that I think kind of in the media, maybe they do get a little bit of a bad rep. So hopefully for our listeners that if that's what you came into this thinking, maybe we'll be able to change your mind a little bit. All right, I'm going to bring the conversation kind of back to the flow we were running with. Now, um, the accelerator work, that sounds really exciting. I love that you just kind of built that and it's really taken off. And it sounds like it did a great job kind of overcoming some of the roadblocks that you were facing internally, the culture challenges and things like that. But are there any other roadblocks that you've been facing kind of internally or within your team? And are there other avenues that you've been exploring innovation wise to try to overcome that, or are you mainly focused on the accelerator right now?
Yeah, we are definitely expanding beyond the accelerator. And I think, any corporate innovation team will probably have the same challenges that I've been experiencing, which is when you work in an operating company, right? And if we take a step back and we think about how pharmaceutical organizations are typically organized, you have your commercial unit, which is out there making sure that your medicines that have been approved by regulatory authorities in the US, that's the FDA, those medicines are getting to the right patients at the right time. Then if you kind of work backwards, you've got a whole part of the organization that's dedicated to clinical trials, right? To
Mhm.
working those potential medicines through the different phases, generating a little bit more evidence each time to say, first we know that these medicines are safe, then we start to say, okay, yeah, we see some signal for efficacy, then we do a really big study, phase 3 study, right, where we say, yeah, we can confirm that in this very large population we see a really strong efficacy signal, and then we kind of get it approved. So like working kind of backwards, you've got this whole section of the organization that's basically doing stage gated development, right? We talk about that
Right.
in the innovation world a lot. Start
Mhm.
small, invest a little bit more, invest a little bit more when you see signals. We've been doing that forever. Our entire development pathway and regulatory pathway is designed on stage gated investment.
Right.
And then you work backwards even more, and we have a research organization. And that research organization is doing experiments with different potential biological targets and different potential compounds and biology itself. And they are really working without an ROI, right? Like when you're that early, you have no idea what the return on investment is going to be, but you know, potentially in the future, like, yeah, there could be, you know, a commercial model there,
Yeah, you're
but
just
you don't
kind of
know.
hoping.
And so we've also been doing that forever. So what's really interesting is when it comes to development of new medicines, the pharmaceutical industry has been working sort of the innovation methodology forever. We've probably defined the innovation methodology, right? I mean, design thinking at its core is really just the scientific method applied to non-scientific problems. Right. But then when you kind of take a step back and you take yourself out of the medicine's development process and you think about how we operate, right? Like how we think about approaching a particular challenge or everybody's job from a day-to-day basis. Those haven't really evolved all that much in the last, 20, 30 years. And probably the biggest evolution, honestly, has been like computers, right? We still kind of take the same approaches, even though like the medicines we develop are innovative. And so that's, to me, the biggest contrast, right? Is we're so innovative in the medicines we develop, but not necessarily in how we operate or the business models we create on the other end.
Yeah, like you're moving so fast on one side of things, but then stagnant on the other.
But stagnant on the other. And honestly, it's because it introduces additional risk, right? Anytime you try to innovate around how you do things, you introduce risk into the what you're doing. And the what are we doing, right, at the end of the day is life-saving or life-transforming or really critical to people. And so how do you balance and make those trade-offs of like, let's try to do this a different way, even though it might introduce more risk into the product development process. And that's a really hard discussion to have. So I think the roadblock that we tend to see is that by definition, people are quite conservative and resistant to change. And so how do we manage experiments in a safe way with the how we do things to help do better with the products that we create?
Yeah, we've kind of spoke about in the past about sort of the ripple effects of innovation. So, you might be looking at just innovating on one, how you do this, or, product, more sustainable products, packaging, or things like that. But you don't understand like what comes after that and what needs to be innovated around that. And it's such a big picture. And then especially when you're dealing with an organization that's 90,000 people, that's a very challenging, group of people to move all at the same time, and what if it doesn't work? There's always going to be some difficulties there. So I totally understand that.
I actually have a great example of that, right? Because we're not just trying to move 90,000 people, we're also trying to move regulators and doctors and patients and pharmacists all at the same time. So one of the things we've been exploring is, when you get a medicine, you get that piece of paper that has like 1-point font that you probably have never read and just kind of tossed out. So we've been exploring, well, what if we instead maybe like say put a QR code on the box where you scan the QR code and it pulls up an app where you can kind of navigate that. You can search it. It links to videos or cartoons explaining stuff, right? Make it much more user-friendly. There's a great sustainability element to it because if you take the paper out, you're obviously reducing your paper, but then you can also shrink the packaging. So then your shipping costs are lower and your carbon footprint is lower, all sorts of great things. And there are some governments that have actually said, we want you to do this. We want you to take the paper out and we want you to have a digital version. And what we learned is that the way the packaging has been designed, the paper is actually padding. So when you take the paper out, now you've lost an element of padding for like the vial or the medicine or whatever. And so you have to reconfigure your entire manufacturing process now and redesign your packaging to like keep the bottle safe. Not that it's not worth it, but as you said, right? Like one innovation that's real has an amazing like opportunity or business case associated with it has a ripple effect within the organization.
And they just ripple effects that just go like as far as you probably wouldn't even expect it. That's an incredible example. Thank you for that. And wow, that just like blew my mind. All right, well, I know we've spoken in the past about your passion for building innovation teams from scratch. You've kind of given us a little bit of a glimpse into the work you've done, and how that's going. But what does that process really look like for you when you're kind of starting from the ground and you're getting going?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think honestly, I benefited from having a leadership team at the time our team was created that really believed that innovation was important as a capability in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they were willing to put money on it and budget on it. And so I think to me, it's starting there, right? Finding those senior leader champions who are willing to give resources and budget to innovation. And maybe it's not the question you asked, but I think it's a question that I often get asked. Like, isn't it everybody's job to do innovation? Why should there be an innovation function?
Mm-hmm.
And I go back and forth on this a lot. And so, like, I'm gonna like pull a like innovation nerd thing out framework right now, which is I think there's different levels of innovation, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
efficiency innovation, which is making the things you do every day better, more fun, cheaper, faster, like whatever. Yeah, and everybody should be doing that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
should we all be spending a little bit of time in our job saying, how can my job just be more enjoyable? Like, what can I get rid of or automate or offload or make more efficient? Sure. And everybody should be innovating there.
Yeah,
On the other
100%.
extreme is like true disruptive innovation, right? Like, I recently saw like a job role for like an ethical hacker. Like, what is that doing? My guess is they're going in and trying to break all of the codes or the security or whatever all the time, right? They're
Right.
purposefully trying to break the way we do things because that's how you identify what your future hurdles are going to be, what your future holes are going to be. You've got a whole team that's like just dedicated to breaking stuff and building it different ways so that when that disruption comes, you're ready. And
Yeah.
that to me, no, everybody shouldn't be doing that, right? Most of your people should be operating the business, and a small group of people, very isolated somewhere else, should be trying to break the business.
Yeah, that's so true.
So you're future ready. And the same thing would be, for like truly transformative innovation, doing things different ways, experimenting, right? Like that part of the business should be siloed. And just like research is siloed when we think about new medicines, like from a business perspective or a way we work perspective, like we should have a research group that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
experimenting with different things. And when it's ready, right, to be implemented or implemented at scale, it should be able to be transitioned back into the operating organization.
Right.
But that requires a certain amount of evidence, and that evidence will require time, resources, and experimentation to develop. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
where that senior leader champion who's like, I know that only one out of every 10 things this innovation team is going to work on is actually going to impact me, but it's going to have such a big impact that I'm willing to make, those 10 bets.
Yeah, roll that dice. Was it difficult to get that buy-in out of the gates
Yes.
from the champions? Yes, just
I'm still
flat
doing
out.
it. I
Yeah,
don't know that I have it, right?
right.
Like I think um it's really difficult because the approach that I think most leaders want to take is I'm going to make three really big bets and those bets are going to pan out because I'm going to really resource them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're truly innovative, you don't know them, right? And
Yeah,
I sort of say like if you can put an ROI on it, it's not true transformational innovation because you can't anything that any assumptions you would make to calculate an ROI, you wouldn't have evidence for, right?
yeah,
If it's really transformational, if it's really never been done, if it's really so out there.
yeah,
And
that's so
so
true.
yeah, I think it's a really different approach to say like I don't think I could pick the winner, so I'm going to give a little bit of money to a lot of different things, right? Plant a lot
Yeah,
of seeds, and then let
hope
like the
something
seeds in the
grows.
soil figure out what grows. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Well, I admire you for fighting that battle, getting that internal buy-in. I'm cheering for
Emotional
you.
labor is high, I will say
Yeah.
that. And
Oh, I believe it. I
yeah.
believe it. But I totally agree with you when you mentioned about the different types of innovation. And I never really thought I'd hear about a salaried hacker position, but look at where we are. Um, so it sounds like you're really, you know, pursuing open innovation through your accelerator. And obviously open innovation is quite a broad word. There's many different parts of it. But then earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned that there was a lot of focus on trying to make everyone's opinions and ideas feel valued and things like that. And one thing that I've seen a lot in kind of the innovation space is kind of like, I work in prize challenges more so on the open side of things, like crowdsourcing from around the world. But a lot of organizations, they like to run internal kind of prize challenges to really get their internal stakeholders involved, their employees, make them feel, valued and like they're really contributing to the overall, goals or innovation of the company. Is that something you guys do, or is it just like where like pharma, the product innovation probably needs to be a very specific type of team that's really pushing it forward?
No, so I mean, the way the accelerators run, it's kind of like that, right? Like we will do a call for projects, so people will submit ideas, and then I would love to just fund all of them, but I have a budget too, right? So we will pick usually 5 per cycle that we'll give a little bit of budget to, and we'll, if they don't have a team already, we'll find folks to work on it, like about 5 people to work on the project for 12 weeks,
Right.
And we resource it pretty well. So it's a part-time gig. Yes, everyone kind of devotes 20% of their time, but we do move the needle quite a bit. And so it's not an individual prize, right? But they do get kind of the prize of getting to at least try to see if their idea has legs with some funding and some support. We have done like a Shark Tank in the past.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is. But again, I kind of put that in the bucket of ideation, right? Like people will come and they'll pitch and they'll get money to work on it. But then they'll go back to their day job and their manager would kind of be like, well, you have all these things to do. Like, I don't want you working on that. Like, right. Or, the budget will go for a little bit of time, but it won't cover the whole thing. And then so it's like, okay, well, where do I go next? There's not a funding mechanism for that. So I think like on one hand, prizes are cool and they can be very motivational, but they're only motivational until you see that they have impact. And once people start to see it's just another ideation session, it starts to kind of kill it, honestly.
Right. No, that makes sense. So what are kind of the main things you're working on with these capability labs and these teams? Like what are the projects you have on the go right now, if you're allowed to tell us?
Yeah, I can talk at a high level, right? So we're really interested in 3 areas of capability. And I should say this, like kind of by way of the acquisition, we, our really cool human experience organization was dissolved and everyone was kind of placed in different parts of the AstraZeneca organization. So my team now reports in through IT. So we take a little bit more of a technology focus, I think, than maybe historically we would have. But we want to maintain kind of the ability to pursue analog routes if possible, right? And that's kind of where the experience innovation comes from. But we do have 3 priority areas for 2023 that we're focused on that I'm super excited about. So we tried to pick capability areas that are not functionally specific, but could really elevate the overall enterprise in terms of our technological evolution. So one is this concept of digital twins. And you may have heard of digital twins out there in the world. It's kind of like creating an in silico model of a physical asset, right? Oftentimes, you'll hear about factories. People will create digital twins of factories so they can kind of mess with different parts of your factory. And you can see what happens without having to actually do it in real time, stop the lines, et cetera. So it's a huge opportunity. And so we've got use cases across the organization in that field. The other is what we call virtual engagement. So thinking about VR, XR, AR, and telemedicine, and how are we working with these new channels of engagement throughout our organization. I actually had, and this is, I'm not getting into anything too proprietary, but I had a great conversation with some folks at a children's hospital, and they had done a study in teenagers. And they found that the virtual engagement, they had 3 arms. They had a virtual engagement only, virtual and in-person, and then in-person only. And the 2 arms that had virtual engagement did way better than the in-person engagement arm. And so it's an interesting thing to think about that, like when we think about people who are digital natives, or even, more so like metaverse natives, right? They're playing video games, they're living their lives through video games. They're like now like really immersed in Oculus. and they're going to grow up and be adults, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
how does
exactly.
medical care, how do we evolve to think about that population and engaging them the best? And so I was kind of like riffing on, well, what if we ran a whole clinical trial in the metaverse where like everything the patients had to do was like a game that they played in the Oculus? Like, wouldn't
Mm.
that be cool?
That
Right.
would be cool. But it's so
Anyways.
it's so true. Like our youth today, especially like through the past couple of years, they're interacting on video games. Like, they're more concerned about what their character on Fortnite is wearing than what they're going to be going to school or sitting on webcam
Yeah.
wearing the next day. And that I think that's going to translate like so perfectly once they're reaching adulthood, and the metaverse is a lot more built out and things like that. It's just going to be such a seamless adoption.
Yeah.
It's definitely some technology I'm always excited about. I love hearing about how it's kind of, or how it's being thought about being adopted in different industries. I had a conversation with the Canadian Cancer Society a few months ago, and like they're talking about running fundraisers in the metaverse and
Yeah.
using augmented reality and things like that. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like that's so cool. Airbus just ran a challenge with us because they just didn't even really know where to start. So they just decided, okay, well, we know we need to figure out how we can adopt this metaverse technology, but instead of um, you know, building a team, investing a bunch of money, let's just ask the crowd, like, how can the metaverse be adopted to our customer experience? And I'm just thinking, I'm like, how cool would it be if you just get on a plane, you get to put on a headset, and like you're already on the beach before you even get there, or something like that. I think it's really exciting.
Totally, totally. And then the third area that we're looking at is person generated digital health data. So think about the Internet of Things that we interact with. How
Right.
can we collect that data to help healthcare overall, like broadly, right? Sometimes you could be looking at particular signals to be able to diagnose somebody with a disease, or maybe you're monitoring them remotely, or maybe you're just
Mm-hmm.
trying to like help their wellness overall, right? Like there's so many ways you can use that data, but there's so much of it out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I usually thought about it as, oh, like your phone or your watch, but there's smart fridges now that will like tell you
Yeah.
what's in your fridge. Like that's so cool. Think about
Right.
like how much you could do with like health and wellness and diet if you like had smart fridge data. So I think there's a lot of potential there as well. And the thread I think that kind of goes through all of these. And if we think about like what is the problem we were trying to solve when we were thinking about picking these capabilities, it's that within the rare disease community, right? There's so few patients, they're spread out everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so accessing healthcare can often be hard. Like many patients will drive 6 hours or more to be able to see a specialist in their disease.
Right.
And that's challenging, right? That's a whole lot of time. And if you're a parent, that's time off of work, that's time out of
Mm-hmm.
school. If you've got a family, it might mean packing up a whole family and taking time away from the other kids. So when you kind of add it up, there's definitely a need to think about how do we use, and it was actually, I can't even claim this phrase. I was talking to another colleague about it, but how do we use big data to
Mm-hmm.
really support small patient populations?
Interesting. You're really out here looking at the full picture. That's
Trying.
try to. Yeah, that's cool.
It can be overwhelming, I will say. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have just had more focus because then like I wouldn't feel so broad. But it's hard to I mean, as it was, picking these three was like really difficult when there's so many other
Right.
ways you could have thought about it, right? So yeah. Sometimes I try not to be overwhelmed by the weight of what we're taking on.
No, it's definitely some big projects on your plate, but some very interesting ones too. So all this, was this just narrowed down recently, kind of with your end of year planning, getting ready to roll into the new year?
Yeah.
Well, what perfect timing to be having the conversation.
Yeah.
Interested in the comment you made about the technologies, the smart fridges, and yeah, everything's getting smart nowadays, right? I was actually talking to someone who's going to be a guest in the new year. He's really big in automotive tech, and he was talking about how when we're kind of moving into autonomous driving and things like that, like that will all be great, but we also need to kind of make sure our drivers are doing okay, or like our passengers are doing okay. And he was talking about the technology that can be used with the, the air filtration systems, like the air circulating you could almost like test them for diseases while they're just breathing in the car and things like that. And I was like, wow, this is so incredible. Because, as amazing as your Apple Watch is and the tests and the data it can spit back to you, like a car apparently can just do so much more.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, think about it. You're captive in that car for so long.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll send you that episode when it's recorded. I feel
Yeah,
like you'll find some of the stuff he says pretty interesting.
for sure.
Um, so obviously, I run a podcast. I'm a big advocate of thought leadership, but I've always liked the way you've spoken about it, and the kind of the approach you take to thought leadership, and what it kind of means in your world. I think our listeners would get a lot of value into hearing your approach. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what thought leadership means to you, and how you tackle it?
Yeah. So yeah, so it's like such a broad question. Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of think of thought leadership into two buckets. The first is communicating the knowledge you've gained. And I've used this analogy a few times now, but like we think back to like the scientific research teams within pharma companies, they're constantly publishing. They're doing a set of experiments, they're kind of analyzing the data together, they're putting it into a cohesive narrative, and that goes into a peer-reviewed journal that's available, to the world to be able to access, learn from, and
Mhm.
build off. And through that, they're creating knowledge capital, right? It's not revenue to the company, but it's a different source of value in the form of an asset, right? This knowledge we put
Mhm.
out there, but also, and building our reputation as a scientific leader. But outside of like the science world, you don't see that kind of publication mentality, right? And
Yeah.
outside of academia for sure. But I think figuring out a way to take the knowledge that we're generating, right? The outcomes of the experiments we're doing, and to package it into a narrative and to share what we've learned, whether that's just internally or maybe even externally in innovation journals or in white papers. I think that's really important too. It's how we create knowledge capital for the work
Mhm.
that we're doing. It's how we demonstrate the value that we're creating. Because again, if only 1 out of every 10 products is actually going to, or innovations we work on is ever going to make it to patients, how do you justify like the
Yeah.
time and the energy, right? You have to have like, well, we're learning, and that learning is translating into an asset for the organization.
Mhm.
That's really hard to do, and I won't say I'm successful at it, but that is definitely my ambition. Right,
I,
like, and what we see is like the learning, so you kind of write them up in a PowerPoint, it goes sits in like somebody's desktop box folder or whatever, and like it's never seen or heard from again, and 2 years later somebody's like, oh, let's do this idea, and they're like, okay, let's do it, not knowing that somebody did it already in the past.
right. Yeah.
um Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just say that's got to feel a little bit discouraging, I suppose, that you put all this work in and you just kind of know that it's going to wind up in a folder somewhere, not getting looked at.
Yeah. And so the other component of thought leadership to me is almost the opposite, right? Like when you're creating knowledge capital and publishing on the work you've done, you're kind of looking backwards and then sort of saying, okay, what have I done and how do I communicate that?
Mhm.
The other thing that I think is really critical for that leadership is looking forward, right? Kind of
Mhm.
analyzing the environment for what's going on, both in your industry, but outside your industry, like what's going on socially or politically or economically. And how do we take those trends and put them together and
Mhm.
form a really cohesive point of view, or maybe a couple scenarios of what's going to happen in the future,
Right.
right? And start communicating that, right? Kind of saying, this is what I think is going to happen. This is why I think it's going to happen. Here's how that's going to impact the work that we do today. And here's what we
Mhm.
can do to either shape which way it goes, right? Like if you've got scenarios and you're saying we're going this way, but if we do these things, we can change the direction this way.
Yeah.
Or we can start to build towards that future. And so there's one really awesome futurist. I love that term. And one day I want to be a futurist myself. He's called the Medical Futurist. And so if your listeners are really into sort of like health tech and the healthcare space, definitely recommend you kind of look at the work he does. He's constantly putting up blog posts, thinking about how technology will impact how we work, how future trends will impact how we work. And I find a lot of inspiration in his work.
Mhm. Well, I can certainly see you being labeled as a futurist someday soon. I think the work you're doing is incredible. So,
Thank you.
you know, Stay consistent with the thought leadership. Stay consistent. That's what it's all about. The consistency. I'm sure someday
It's
very
so
soon.
hard though.
I
Like
know, especially when you have a million other things going on that in your day to day, it always is a little bit challenging.
honestly, I think this is an area where you look at productivity experts who are posting like, okay, for 20 minutes you do this and 40 minutes you do that, and everyone wake up at 5 a.m. and take a nice cold shower. And I'm just like, no, like I can't do all that stuff.
The
So
ice
like
cold
there are some
shower.
real people who are like, yeah, I'm a thought leader, but I also do all of these other things. And like, here's how I make it work. Like,
Yeah,
I want that advice.
yeah. It always seems to be kind of the extremists that are the ones sharing their outrageous scheduling plans and how they conduct themselves. I remember this one guy back in university. He gave us a speech to one of our entrepreneurship classes, and he told us if we weren't waking up at 4 a.m., we weren't winning the day and all this stuff. And I was just like, man, I'm not going to wake up at 4 a.m. There's no
Yeah.
chance. Um,
Yeah. I need to have like a how to be productive for like real people like
yeah,
situation,
yeah,
and I'm sorry, but like never say never, right? But if you find me taking an ice bath, there's probably like pigs flying and like purple unicorns coming out of every cave because like, whew,
yeah,
no.
yeah. Where's that audiobook? We got to find that.
Yeah.
Um, well, it sounds like you have so many cool and interesting projects on the go. Your hand and you are looking really at the broad picture. So, you know, you I feel like you really have a good handle of the pulse of what's going on in your world. You can probably see there's some significant changes coming, and obviously your planning sessions are kind of based around that. What's your vision in the next 5 or so years for yourself, your team, the industry? Are there any things that you're really excited about, or um, just that are approaching quickly?
Yeah. The dreaded 5-year question. I
Keeping things broad.
don't know. Can you even ask that? Like, if somebody had asked that question like 5 years ago, like, whew,
Oh, that would have been a tough one 5 years ago.
yeah, that's really interesting. And um, I think it goes a little back a little bit to, one of the culture questions you asked.
Mhm.
So what's fascinating to me about working in the pharma industry and then, sort of now kind of getting into the tech world, right, in the digital health space, is you have a huge culture clash that's
Mhm.
coming. Pharma has historically been very IP focused, right, and wanting to own everything they do. And the tech world has been quite open source,
Yeah.
right? And wanting to put out and like make available everything they do. And not everybody, and this isn't universal, right, on either side, but you see one culture more than is a
Yeah, for
dominant in
sure.
each side. And and now like in the digital health world, they're sort of coming together. And like, the medical futurist was sort of saying this the other day, like digital health won't be a thing in 10 years or maybe 15 years. It'll just be health, right? Health
Yeah.
will like be mostly digital or mostly virtual at that point in time. Um, and so, how do these cultures mesh? And I think the next 5 years is going to be a lot about that, right?
Mhm.
How do we kind of go from kind of the protectionist culture in pharma
Mhm.
with the collaborative nature of tech? And how do these ecosystems get built? How do these partnerships get built?
Mhm.
How do we start building communities of super users and communities of solvers around the work that we're doing together? I want to see that evolve because that's going to be so unique. And for sure, as I think about my team, right? Like, we have the accelerator, we're building these capability labs. I want to build out like a partnership ecosystem function. I want to build out a think tank so that we're
Mhm.
driving this forward as it pertains, at least as it pertains to the rare disease community and how we work together. And I will say, the conversations I've had with other companies and like-minded folks within rare disease companies, we I think are willing to take the lead maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more on this open source approach because we have to, right? Our numbers
Right.
are so small. Our patient populations are so small. We have to collaborate if we want to make an impact.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping to see, more pre-competitive collaborations where companies are working together and a
Mhm.
rising tide raises all ships. I'm hoping to see more true partnerships between tech companies and pharma companies and more kind of like startup collaboration where a
Right.
medicine isn't just launched as a medicine, but it's launched as a total healthcare solution, right?
Right.
Where we're really helping everybody. Those are the kinds of things I think for the next 5 years would be really cool. And if my team can drive that, that would be awesome.
I'd say that would be a huge win for you and your team.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other industries that are probably walking a very similar line where, you're looking at the rapid advancements of tech in the tech world. And, their organizations or industries have traditionally been more, keep your cards close to your chest and things like that. And, you don't want to wind up being Blockbuster, right? You gotta adopt, you gotta kind of start making the right partnerships and kind of getting
Yeah.
with the times. And I think, like you said, it's going to be an interesting next few years for your industry and others to kind of see how that, what I'll call right now, friction kind of fizzles away, or what, like, where it kind of lands to be a little bit more of a cohesive relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And look, all good things must come to an end, right? Like
That's it.
there's a peak, and then as things start to fall, like something else is growing. And
Mm-hmm.
my hope is that, we are helping to fuel the growth of the next thing, whether that's the next new operating model for, health tech or life science companies, or the combination of life science tech companies. I've heard it referred to as like the bio-industrial complex. Who knows, right? But
Yeah.
like that's my hope. And meanwhile, like we also got to keep the old model going, right? Like the lights got
Yeah.
to stay on. Like we have to, and for us, it's not even about, continuing to sustain the company. These medicines have to get to people. Patients are waiting, right?
Yeah.
So we can't just kind of forego everything we're doing and say, oh, we're going to pause for a while, figure out what we're going to do, and then like start again in the future. We can't.
No, you got to keep rolling.
Got to keep rolling.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always enjoy our conversations. I'm so happy you took the time to join me today. Um, you're an extraordinary innovator. You have so many amazing things going. I think you're also an extraordinary futurist. We're just going to label with you with that right now.
Yeah. Hooray!
Yeah, you're dubbed the term. I look forward to watching you and your team and the impact you're going to have throughout your career and everything going on. So I'm really excited to have the relationship we have. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in and listened today for the insightful sessions. Um, you know, if you're looking to connect with myself or Ankita, you can find us both on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to myself. Are you open to
Yeah.
people jumping in your inbox if they have any
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely. LinkedIn is
Perfect.
definitely the best way. I'm constantly checking it, as part of the ecosystem outreach. So absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Well, yes, you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. My name is Adam Olsen. We will be taking a break over the holidays. We'll be starting again in the new year for season 2 of Innovation Heroes. You can catch past episodes at innovationheroes.buzzsprout.com. Our content is open, so feel free to share our resources and forward them to your friends to further your own innovation goals. So thank you for being part of the solution. Thank you again, Ankita, for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Fantastic.